What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Chill, where I, Graham G.S. and Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network and on Peacock. And today we're talking the debut episode of WWE Evil, focusing on Hollywood Hulk Hogan. So you've probably seen the previews, if not outright seen the show. But WWE started airing previews for this new program on Peacock called WWE Evil, focusing on the biggest and best bad guys in WWE history. So they put up the first 8 episodes already, the entire first season, on, I think, last Thursday, March 24th, I think it was. And it's a good show. I mean, just from watching this episode alone, and my approach with the show is that, especially with it being WrestleMania week, I'll be watching it incrementally. That's even a word. Like, I watched this episode this week, probably another episode next week. I might be doing one review a week as opposed to, like, with Ruthless. There was like 5 or 6 Ruthless Aggression episodes. I did those all at once, and I put up a new review pretty much every day for like a week. This, I might be doing one review a week for the next 8 weeks. Maybe I'll do 2 at some point. I don't know. But for right now, I'm going to probably slowly ease myself into it, like I would any other regular show I would watch on Netflix or Peacock or Amazon or whatever. So, yeah, it's not exactly a show that breaks anything new, that tells you anything new, breaks news stories or whatever. It's a nice, enjoyable show, I think, to watch with someone who's not as overly familiar with the product as you probably are. And if you're not, another great reason to watch this show. I would recommend checking it out anyway. I think Hollywood Hulk Hogan was the perfect first episode because he had the greatest heel turn in wrestling history back in 1996 with the NWO. So I really liked that aspect of it. Again, a lot of the stories they told here, or their sides of the stories, depending on who we're hearing from, were interesting, and we've heard them before in books and in documentaries and on shows and whatever. The Monday Night War show, for example. So this really isn't anything new. But I enjoyed it for what it was. I liked the premise of the show. They have other episodes up on Randy Orton, Sasha Banks, Stephanie, Roman Reigns, among others. So I look forward to watching those. The Miz, I think, is the next one, episode 2. So, yeah, this was a good introductory episode, though. And it's also narrated, funnily enough, by John Cena, the man that everyone wanted to turn heel during his rise to superstardom, but never did. So I thought that was interesting. And I think Cena does a great job in the narration department as well. So anyway, they start off the episode with Bruce Pritchard. Not exactly the greatest way to start any episode, but we hear from Bruce Pritchard praising Hulk Hogan's charisma and how Hulkamania was a phenomenon. And by the way, I'm not going to detail every interview that we hear from people like I would like Dark Side of the Ring, for example. Really just the highlights. So anyway, he never wanted to change his colors. Red and orange, or red and yellow rather, was associated with McDonald's, which was bursting at the time and still is today, of course. And you know, it was huge for him. He had crazy momentum, influenced people like Mario Lopez, that we heard from on this show. We heard from Mario Lopez, Dr. Phil, all these other random celebrities, Corey Taylor from Slipknot, which was cool. I guess that's what happens when you have a Peacock show that can get you the celebrities. They have contacts, you know, they can network and whatever, so I thought that was funny. And a lot of these people are genuine fans, too, so it was cool to hear from Mario Lopez, who has been involved with wrestling before. Peter Rosenberg was one of the talking heads on the show. He called Hogan the ultimate American hero. But the culture changed going into the 1990s. And it was around that point that Hogan noticed he was starting to get booed more. And it was at that point he knew he needed a change. For what it's worth, we hear Hogan's side of the story as we should because the episode's all about him. Take whatever he is saying for what it's worth. Or with a grain of salt, rather, because Hogan is a notorious liar. I think everyone knows about that by this point, but especially when it comes to the turning heel stuff and the NWO stuff, like he said before on Steve Austin's podcast years ago, that he wanted to turn heel as early as 1990 at WrestleMania 6 by turning on the Warrior after he won the WWE Championship. Like, silly shit like that, I'm sure that never actually happened, that he wanted to call himself Triple H. He was the original Triple H, and technically he was, but he wasn't called Triple H before Triple H started calling himself Triple H. So again, we hear a lot of bullshit on this episode. Eric Bischoff really seems like, to me, the only straight shooter on the entire episode. You know, Vince Russo isn't that guy, Hogan's not that guy. They kind of tell their own sides of the story. And even Bischoff has been known to tell a tall tale, you know, here and there over the years, but he's probably one of the bigger straight shooters on this episode. So I'm glad they got him as well. But anyway, so back to Hogan. In the early 90s, he wasn't doing well in Hollywood. He was in Mr. Nanny and Suburban Commando, all these movies that really didn't do well. He was actually filming Thunder in Paradise near Universal Studios, which hosted WCW at that point, which is how he got in contact with Eric Bischoff, spoke with him, signed on with WCW in 1994, And it was Bischoff's goal to bring in as many ex-WWE stars as possible. People like Roddy Piper, Randy Savage, all the big names from the late 80s, mid-80s in WWE to make a splash in WCW. And he knew that going to WCW would help them, but not so much Hulk Hogan. Like, it got old after a while when he started doing the whole red and yellow stuff as he was towards the end of his WWE run. And, it made news. It made news that he went to WCW, and it was a good boost for them. But again, it got stagnant after a little while, and Bischoff knew that they had to be different from WWE. And he also wanted to make Hogan edgier. So when he initially approached him with the idea of turning heel, Hogan had no interest, according to Bischoff. Later on, Hall and Nash invade WCW as part of the Outsiders, that whole thing in the spring of '96, one of the best storylines in wrestling history. And that led to the Third Man storyline. Who's the Third Man? The only thing was, while they were promoting that storyline on TV, they had an idea of a person or two that it could be. They didn't actually set it in stone until the night of, according to Bischoff himself and other people that were interviewed on this episode. Hogan actually had Bischoff fly out to see him, and Hogan asked Bischoff, who's the Third Man, and Bischoff wouldn't tell him. Bischoff had Sting in mind, and I guess he did end up telling him it was Sting. And Hogan's like, well, you can't do that because I want to do it. And he started to second-guess himself as far as, maybe it's not the best decision I turn heel, or maybe it's not the best decision I stay face, or whatever. And Bischoff already kind of was thinking of Sting. And Hogan was like, all right, I'll do it. Just don't give it to Sting. Like, it really should be me. That's my spot. Again, that's Hogan's words. But according to Kevin Nash, they weren't sure that Hogan was going to do it up until 4 p.m. that day of the pay-per-view, Bash at the Beach in 1996. And they just weren't sure if he was actually going to go through with it. Sting was the backup just in case. But they do relive the entire heel turn from that pay-per-view, the iconic happenings of how it went down and whatever. And just a really big deal. And they talk about the crowd started throwing trash, and it was this really big moment, which it was. And almost instantaneously, he became the biggest villain in all of wrestling. We hear from Jimmy Hart, who said the police had to be called that night, and Turner Broadcasting got calls the next morning from angry parents. Oh, how dare Hulk Hogan turn his back on us and whatever. Hogan talks about dyeing his beard, and that pissed a lot of people off. And how everyone at that point loved the bad guys. We even hear from fucking Dr. Phil, who talks the psychology of the Hulk Hogan character at that point in his career, which is hysterical. The audience started to dig the anti-heroes more. And, the NWO shirt took off around that point. Hogan was having a blast. WCW went on to win in the ratings for 83 weeks. And, they kind of run through the Spark Notes version of what was going on, the rise and fall of WCW. And Hogan had said that, he had said certain things. Oh, that doesn't work for me, brother. Oh, that doesn't work for me, brother. Like, he talked about that, or that was said about him on the Dark Side of the Ring show this most recent season. And, I know it was just funny to hear Kevin Nash tell that story. He's like, I don't care if it doesn't work for you. Like, you're going to go out there and do it. Like, unless you have another idea, that's what you're fucking doing. So I got a good laugh out of that. The numbers started to slip for Nitro and WCW on the whole around that point. Bischoff got, he lost control, got forced out in 1999. That led to Vince Russo being brought in instead. And it was his thing. It was like his proclamation, according to Bischoff, that he wanted to fire everyone over 40. And it was also one of his goals, according to Bischoff, that Russo wanted Hulk Hogan out of the company. He wanted that to be his claim to fame, according to Bischoff. And Russo denies it, whatever. They relived the whole, not the poke of doom, but that whole thing in the summer of 2000? When Hogan went to go face Jarrett in the ring, and Vince Russo had him laid down and whatever, that whole bullshit. And Russo doesn't even deny that it was dumb. Like, he was trying to defend himself here and talking about it, which was so stupid. But yeah, Hogan was gone from WCW soon after that whole thing went down in the summer of 2000. It wasn't long after the WWE bought WCW. NWO was then brought into WWE a year later, not in for the Invasion storyline, ironically enough, but in 2002, right before WrestleMania 18. And that led to The Rock and Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 18. The crowd was deafening. I actually just rewatched the match in full right after watching this on Monday night. Fantastic match from a crowd standpoint. Just a great match in general. But they cheered Hogan when they weren't supposed to. He was supposed to be the heel. And it was around that point, according to Peter Rosenberg, I think, was interviewed, and David Shoemaker and people like that, that he realized that there was a middle ground there. He didn't have to be the goody two-shoes babyface, but he didn't also have to be this hateable heel. He could be Hollywood Hulk Hogan as a babyface, and that's what he did in 2002 for a good period of time. Vince even told him, I guess, according to Hogan, when he went through the curtain, to go get his red and yellow gear, brother. Like, he had to go get his red and yellow gear immediately and wear it out to SmackDown the following Friday, maybe on Raw the next night. Bischoff said, as far as the overall takeaway of the turn, that it was genuine betrayal and a thing of beauty. And I would agree. It was one of the greatest heel runs in wrestling history and the greatest heel turn ever in wrestling, in my opinion. And I think a lot of people would agree with that as well. So a good first introductory episode to WWE Evil. Again, I didn't say anything new. You guys probably knew a lot of that already. I enjoyed watching this, though. I liked that they got a lot of people to be interviewed for this, from fans like Peter Rosenberg and David Shoemaker to the people involved, Bischoff, Nash, Hogan. Surprised there were no comments from Scott Hall. Obviously he's since passed away, but he only passed away a couple of weeks ago. It depends on when they filmed this. I don't know if it was a couple of months ago or a year ago, and from what I understand, Scott Hall's health wasn't at the best even then, so that's probably why they didn't use him for this documentary, unfortunately, although that would have been cool. But yeah, we hear from a lot of people here on the documentary, and it was very interesting. And it was cool to kind of relive these moments in wrestling history, if nothing else. So again, you're not watching a groundbreaking show. It's not the greatest documentary show I've ever seen from WWE or just in general. Like, Dark Side of the Ring does a better job of recapping this stuff than WWE themselves do. But it was a good show, and I look forward to watching other episodes in the weeks to come. I think The Miz is the next one, like I mentioned. Sasha Banks might be episode 3, and then a whole bunch of them from there. Randy Orton's coming up as well, so I look forward to watching the show for the first time in the weeks to come and reviewing them here on the channel for you fine folks. So thank you guys, speaking of which, for watching this review, or listening to this review rather. I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content, including hitting the bell button to be notified every time a new video goes up on the daily. Have an awesome one, guys. I'm Graham G. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.